And you can see here that we decided that we would record this portion of the meeting because we had several council members who are on vacation this week and are unable to attend. And we think that this next part of the meeting is going to be really interesting. We want to make sure that we capture it and we can look back at it. So with that, I think it's all yours, Gabby.
Okay. So as the first step, we wanted to share some slides from the data that we spoke about and made a list at the last meeting, just to remind us of various aspects of kids' exposure to violence that we might want to consider focusing on. So here are some of the ways that research tells us that kids may be exposed to violence, which is such a sad thing, right? But it's shown in research also that children are more likely to be exposed to violence and crime than adults are, which it's hard to wrap my head around that, but that's suggested in the research. And then here are some ways that youth tell us that they're concerned about safety, particularly at school. And data shows that 1 in 10 students say they rarely feel safe at school. And most students think safety at school is a problem, something that's on their minds. And so when Martina, the staff, and I met to plan today's meeting, we were considering the various aspects of violence that youth are exposed to. And after some discussion, we decided that maybe we could focus, consider focusing on one of the earliest ways that unfortunately many kids are exposed to violence, and that is domestic violence. So if you go to the next slide, here's some of the sobering facts about domestic violence and its effect on children. And these, there aren't like controlled studies where they say this group will be exposed to violence and this group won't, but the studies that are available typically are in school-age children, and kids exposed to violence experience greater incidence of these 10 things, probably other things as well. Now, the hope would be that you just grow up, you move away, that's that. But unfortunately, there also is a significant legacy of growing up with domestic violence. So these data are pulled from adults. So it's recall data of what were you exposed to in your childhood. And so adults who were exposed to domestic violence in childhood are 6 times more likely to take their own life by suicide and 50% more likely to abuse substances. So potential self-medication. So growing up with domestic violence is considered the most significant predictor also of whether the person will eventually engage in domestic violence themselves, either as an offender or victim or both. So do we have to care about this in Wisconsin? Yes, we do. Wisconsin is not one of the states that tracks specific child exposure to domestic violence as kind of neat and cleanly as some other states do, but the data on domestic violence deaths, the numbers are rising. So 80 people in Wisconsin lost their lives to domestic violence in 2021. And that might seem like a small number, but it likely does not include everyone because it's really likely there's underreporting of this. So as thought, leaning towards thinking about exposure to domestic violence and other aspects of violence in youth, we want to explore this topic further, and we're lucky to have a speaker this morning, Cody Warner, who uses they, he pronouns, and the director, or excuse me, the LGBTQ and youth program director at End Domestic Violence Wisconsin. So after graduating from UW-Platteville with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Human Services, they worked for 5 years as Youth Services Coordinator at Family Advocates Incorporated, coordinating all children and family services needed for victims and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, and all trainings and events evolving around healthy relationships, intimate partner violence, and sexual assault. So I'm exhausted even reading that list, and I'm very excited to hear what Cody has to say. So since 2014, Cody at the statewide level has been providing training and technical assistance to domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, encouraging these agencies to have comprehensive services for families, LGBTQ identified victims and survivors. They've been an active member of our OCMH Collective Impact Council and former resiliency team work group. Cody is passionate about engaging youth, creating brave spaces for youth and LGBTQ identified folks to build leadership, and addressing the root causes of violence to end oppression in all forms. Thank you, Cody, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you so much. Excuse me, and good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Cody Warner. Use they, he pronouns. I'm based in Madison, and End Abuse does statewide work. So although I'm based in Madison, I do travel to a lot of the communities in Wisconsin, as well as my colleagues. And just a really brief, so End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin is one of 4 coalitions in Wisconsin. So there's the Sexual Assault Coalition, Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Then there's also American Indians Against Abuse, and then the Black and Brown Women Power Coalition. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, although I am coming from one of the coalitions that in Wisconsin, there are in fact 4. Housed within End Abuse, we have 3 different projects. 2 do direct service work. So one's doing direct service work in Milwaukee with Black African American population, as well as they're the ones that are taking the lead on, I believe, the DOJ housing initiative. And then we have a Rise Law Center that provides free and low cost services to survivors, and specifically those who speak more than one language or English is not their first language. And then the last one is a national technical assistance and training provider, specifically for, so it's called the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life, or NCAL. And so they're the, like I said, the national TA and technical assistance provider for everything revolving around elder abuse, elder justice, and things like that. So kind of like one of the things that continually reminds me like why I'm in this work, why I continue to do the things that I do, is because I would really like for the youth to come up and take over my position, because these are the stats that we're getting from the YRBS data, that 1 in 5 teens are experiencing dating violence in Wisconsin before they leave high school, that 1 in 4 teens are getting abuse through a mobile device, whether it's calling them names, harassing them, putting them down. And the biggest stat that continues to scare me is that of the 1 in 5 teens, only 2 in 3 teens who are in an abusive relationship never told anyone about the abuse. And that's the part that scares me the most, because there are so many services, so many resources that we try to provide and try to push out to the communities. And still we're seeing that youth aren't feeling safe or brave to talk about the things that are happening in their lives with adults or even with their peers. So that's why we really try and focus our youth initiatives on empowering the youth to find where they have that passion to really move forward with building their own personal development, building their own personal power to feel that they can start talking about these things. So for the moment of truth, so this came out shortly after the George Floyd shooting and the protesting against police sanctioned violence. And so one of the reasons that I want to put it in this slide is because as service providers, and especially as for a lot of people in this space, white people as service providers, we have to hold ourselves accountable, because even though we are good people doing good work, we still have the ability to cause harm to those that we're trying to serve and help. And so this moment of truth letter was signed by almost every single coalition in the US as a way to hold ourselves accountable and as a way to continually check in on areas that we've failed people in the past. So just to kind of go over some of the visions of liberation to support, so like with reframing the idea of public safety to promote and utilize emerging community-based practices that resist abuse and oppression and encourage safety, support, and accountability. Removing police from schools to better support educational environments that are safe, equitable, and productive for all students. So like this is something that we've actually seen a lot more youth become interested in, especially talking at our annual statewide teen summit on healthy relationships. And so like we have pockets of youth that didn't come together at all talking with each other, unfacilitated by adults being like, I heard in a presentation that you got police out of schools, like what were the steps that helped you get through this? Or like there'll be youth talking about ways in which that they can try and overturn the sexist, racist dress codes within their schools, right? So we have youth that have this passion and just need those supportive adults to provide that or help get them to a platform that they can amplify their voice. That we need to really decriminalize survival and address mandatory arrest, failure to protect, bail, fines, and fees, and the criminalization of homeless and street economy. So talking about sex work, drug trades, and things like that, and how we can best start to think about decriminalization of more marginalized folks that continually to get oppressed. And to provide safe housing for everyone, to increase affordable quality housing. The Housing First initiative that we're supporting and trying to amplify in Milwaukee is one of the ways in which that we're trying to do that in Wisconsin. And then invest in care, not cops. So really shift the work, resources, and responsibility of care back into the local communities. And a lot of the resources that I'll be talking about and sharing today, I've also included them in the PowerPoint as well. So feel free to continue to educate yourselves and as well as reach out to me afterwards. So these are the questions that that lead and guide our policy work. And I'm not going to read through all of the questions, but I did want to mention that the first one, like, will this meet the needs of the last survivor? So this is a concept that we adapted. And so the last survivor is more of a concept that we are making sure that we're centering the realities and needs of those most marginalized that will enable us to reach all survivors of violence and create an effective, sustainable movement toward ending domestic violence and other forms of oppression. And Kimberly Crenshaw is quoted saying, placing those most marginalized in the center is the most effective way to resist efforts to compartmentalize experiences and undermine collective action. And I think that really helps me solidify like what that last survivor concept is, because if we are building these resources, these systems, these services for people who are the most marginalized, everyone else then benefits from those services, because all of those barriers that the people most marginalized with, like people who don't have that many barriers, they can still access those services, right? It's just we need to be thinking about how that does affect those that aren't at the table, aren't speaking up, aren't able to show up for whatever reason. So I just wanted to mention that as a little bit more clarity, and to provide this as something to think about as other people are moving forward with their policy work and like with their policy teams. So these are the big areas that we have been focusing on. I don't believe our next few years of policy work has been released yet. But so this is for these areas of focus are from 2021 to 2023. So our policy folks will be working to adapt, update, and change our areas of focus as needed. But I did want to share these kind of like more broad topics. So some of the ones that I will talk about, so with the prevention in youth, specifically, that one we're focusing on looking at the school to prison pipeline, and that children and seeing children and youth that they are not criminals. And identifying that Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. And like, there's so many stories that I've heard from youth of color, specifically Black male, and in Madison, of like them getting ticketed for loitering when they were just standing outside their locker, right? Like, one, why are we being ticketed for doing what you're supposed to be doing as a youth? I mean, I would have been ticketed all the time in high school because I was always just standing around my locker during the hall times, right? And so like, it's just thinking about that and how we can best start to dismantle those things that are causing that pipeline, the school to prison pipeline. One of the other areas that we've been really trying to focus on, and we've been trying to get teen dating violence bill passed for a while. But when we're talking about the area of focus for the policy work, youth who experience sexual and dating violence are more likely to experience symptoms of depression, anxiety, engage in unhealthy behaviors, and risk-taking behaviors. And can cause physical and health issues, especially amongst LGBTQIA2S+ students. So that's the long acronym of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, asexual, and two-spirit. And so when we're looking at that, we really want to center the voices of the disenfranchised youth and encourage young folks to think critically about the socially constructed gender binary and how to identify how oppressive gender expectations reinforce unhealthy relationship dynamics to integrate teen dating violence prevention education in the classroom. And so, like I said, we have tried to introduce a teen dating violence bill that would essentially not necessarily, would kind of like mandate schools to incorporate teen dating violence curricula for grades 7 through 12. And it's not just like putting all of that on schools, right? It's connect with your local domestic violence programs. There's a domestic violence agency in every single county in Wisconsin. And one of the continual things that I hear from youth advocates across the state is that the communities and the school districts, they almost are still trying to dismantle that or break down that idea that abuse isn't happening in their communities or that the teens aren't dating. And while we'd like to think teens are focusing on schools and building themselves, like, the reality is that folks are starting to date and become interested in intimate relationships a lot earlier than most adults want to believe. But it's a reality, and it's something that we have to continually take into account when we're talking about working with youth and talking about trying to get in like really ending violence. Like, how are we supposed to end violence when we have like school administrators saying domestic violence does not happen in our communities, right? So always trying to help the advocates find ways to maybe not so much creative ways, but like ways in which that the schools will understand what they're talking about, right? So like providing them with the language that the advocates that they can then go to the schools and be like, listen, here's how this fits into your social emotional learning. Here's how it helps fit into like this type of curricula, right? So that it's not so much of a, hey, I want to talk about domestic violence with your students, and then folks getting really worried that there's going to be a lot of disclosures, because there can be disclosures when we're talking about domestic violence, but advocates are trained to work with youth in that capacity. So really seeing the advocates as a resource to the schools when we're ever able to get this teen dating violence bill pushed through. So I talked about the prevention and youth and teen dating violence areas. I think one of the other things that I do want to mention with my time is that NW's hosts an annual statewide teen summit. I mentioned it a little bit before. Last year, we had 650 people in attendance. Over half of those folks were youth. Of the 30 workshops that we had, I think all but 2 were facilitated or co-facilitated by youth. And I think right now the age, it's focused more for high school youth, but we have had middle school youth attend these events in the past. And so like, it's a massive event where people come together and really start to unpack some of these things, start to build a foundational knowledge of like where we can grow, like, and then also build in spaces where people can connect with others like them. So like we have affinity group where like, oh my gosh, I lost the word for it, but essentially a group where it's just for youth that, you know, we have like racial affinity groups one evening where folks can go into a space and it'll be folks that specifically identify racially. And it's more of a informal conversations and like being able to connect and unpack with other people like that look like you, talk like you, have similar experiences like you. And then we have other areas too of like roundtable topics. So like it might not be specific to your identity, but it's like a lot more you want to connect on a specific topic. And so it's like more of that informal discussion. Sometimes there's a little activity, it depends on the facilitator, but really awesome space to be a part of, as well as we usually get some really awesome keynotes. Last year we had Aisha Fukushima, a really awesome artist, raptivist, advocate. I don't think her book's out yet, but yeah, amazing human being. And then we also try and have a youth keynote as well. So this past year we had Alora Young, really amazing, talking about she was able to talk about not only her mental health experiences, but like how important it is that youth are talking about their mental health experiences, and then also related it to violence and trauma. And so it was really awesome hearing her speak. And I know I've kind of gone on a tangent with the Teen Summit. I typically do, but to kind of go back to the policy, I know I only talked about 2 of these. Are there others that are listed here that folks would like to know a little bit more about?
Cody? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Did you talk about accountability over punishment?
I did not. So that one we're really looking more at the criminal legal frame, and as starting, or not starting, but okay, let me pause. So looking at the criminal legal frame renders questions about why people act the way they do irrelevant. It only matters that they have acted, right? So like that's kind of where the punishment is, where it's happened, you're punished, you're branded for life. And then what we're kind of wanting is to act with more expansive view of justice, to explore work that addresses the root causes of violence. And so a lot of our prevention work that we do also incorporates like talking about white supremacy and talking about how patriarchy has harmed everyone, right, in our current society, and then to limit incarceration to the last response, not the first, since that's kind of been our go-to is, you know, calling the police, getting that other person arrested, and then also redistribute funds from law enforcement and carceral systems and develop a more holistic approach to justice. And I know those are all kind of like big, broad areas too. And right, but like I was saying, we, at least from like the prevention and like programmatic side of things, we are making sure that we're talking about like how our own privileges as staff at end of youth, you know, how we have that and how we can then leverage that in different spaces, but also noting that, you know, we're still taking advantage of those privileges. And so I think modeling that and also making sure that these things do move forward, that, you know, we are finding ways to reallocate those funds to more community-based practices instead of carceral systems, because we know that the carceral systems aren't working, and are harming more communities than they're actually helping.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
Cody, I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about the last survivor
Mhm.
Framework, and I was wondering if you could give an example of something that you've already done or engaged in or thought about that you would be doing differently because of this lens.
Yeah. So I think, again, gonna bring up the Teen Summit, mainly because it's our largest event, and I think it's one of the things that we've really incorporated the last survivor with. So the Teen Summit is co-created with youth, because originally the Teen Summit was a less than 200 people event for adults that worked with youth who've experienced domestic violence, sexual assault in some capacity. And so from the beginning of the Teen Summit to now, we have over 650 people. The demographic is actually reflective of Wisconsin, so much so that like rural white youth are coming to the space saying, I thought this was an event for Wisconsin youth because they have never seen a person of color before. And so like, you know, having all these people in one space too, there's that growing and learning, but because the youth that have wanted to set or that have co-created this event, they're the ones that have been saying from the beginning, we are going to be centering Black women of color, we're going to be centering queer folks and queer folks of color. And so in doing that as well, we're also recognizing that a lot of people aren't necessarily able to do this for free, right? Even if, you know, we've worked with them for years and, you know, they even may be a member organization, like we still want to make sure that we're compensating them. So like we've created a presentation compensation for the presenters that attend and facilitate at our event. We provide, depending on funding, we are trying to provide as many scholarships to youth as possible, so that to limit barriers to attending. If we're able to provide lodging, that's the biggest barrier because of how expensive the Kalahari can be, because that's where we typically have the event. And then I think also continuing to expand like what we're doing, not just like sticking to like, okay, we've done this, it's working, but like, you know, as we're growing, we're also finding a lot of growing pains, and like things that, we didn't want to necessarily have to like put a process in place because it felt like it was going to be too oppressive. But now it's like, okay, we didn't do that, and people are now getting harmed because we didn't do that. Right. So wanting to make sure that when we are putting out this information that around policies, that we are thinking of how is this going to impact not just the communities, but like how is this going to impact the people, right? Like how is this really helping the most marginalized person who isn't ever at these tables, right? The people that are constantly being talked for instead of given the mic. And so I think that's one way that I've really tried to, that I believe End Abuse has been pushing the Last Survivor, is one, having the demographic of folks who you're wanting to serve at the conversation day one. Like getting those people involved right away, and so that you can start to build something collectively that actually can help those that are within those margins to be more centralized. So like actively taking a stance on like amplifying voices that, often get talked for instead of letting them talk for themselves is definitely one way. And yeah, I think it's also kind of a vulnerability moment of taking a breath and being like, okay, where are we harming people with our policies? Like, where are we focusing on policy more than helping the people? And yeah, so I'm gonna pause there. So these are, so these three main points here are actually from our prevention campaign, Dare to Know. So these three areas are kind of how we build our programming when we're working with youth. So first, we need them to value their voice. So in translating that here, I need you all to continue educating yourselves and using your platforms to amplify the messaging to at least to bring awareness to others, right? At least to make sure that people know that there are domestic violence programs within our state that are free and available 24/7, 365, offering shelter services if needed. So like also knowing your local resources to offer if people would like them. Even if you don't know or can't think of anything, 211 has, I think, all like state and federal funded programs, which includes the domestic violence programming. So if people don't want to call police, they can call 211 and they will get connected with the domestic violence programs or any other programming that they could want that's funded. And then start to challenge yourself to speak out against injustice and oppression within yourself and others. Something that I started doing as a semi-joke, but also as a way to like kind of be like, hey, what you're doing is kind of problematic, is like when people show those problematic things, I'll just kind of lean over to them and be like, excuse me, your white supremacy is showing. And I kind of chuckle because like, we uphold different things within white supremacy, but and one of my other favorite lines is, we don't have to pay membership dues to the KKK to uphold white supremacy. Because we often see like racist behaviors as like our whole being, right? And it's like we have to check ourselves. So even within yourself, or even like however you can find small ways to start to challenge that and continue to build those muscles within yourself and others, on being like, hey, that really isn't, what you just said is absolutely not acceptable, or I found that really harmful, or ouch, gross. Why would you say, maybe not the why question, but, you know, making sure that you are checking those people in your life, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to start dismantling violence, is if we start challenging that oppression and injustice when we're seeing it. Then the following is persuade your peers. So bringing your colleagues, your coworkers, staff, friends, family on your learning journey. One, it helps build accountability between you and that other person, as well as, you know, you start to build those safe and brave spaces where you can openly be vulnerable and be like, this is a place from privilege, or like, this is how I'm seeing it because this is the only experience I've had. And then that can also help you create those resources or even events to build gaps in services when you're talking about, you know, like, oh, well, I don't understand this. It's like, oh, well, I know someone who's a lot more knowledgeable on this, right? So like starting to build that network of your own peers to hold yourself accountable, and building that almost like a chosen family that's gonna, one, keep you accountable and also let you be vulnerable, right? So when you start to speak out against those injustices of injustice and oppression, right? You start to also find those people who are willing to support you when you're speaking out. Then connecting with your community. So you've done the learning, you've brought along some friends, and then to begin to extend those networks outward to continue to promote awareness and education. So a lot of times this is where we challenge the youth to start thinking about what kind of event would you like to host? What kind of awareness or promotional type of thing do you want to bring to your community? Some will fully want to do like a community presentation at their schools and are able to get that done. Others will create some really awesome flyers and get that information out and like go to the spaces where they hang out with their friends and put up that information, you know, again, to start to build that awareness and start to really extend that awareness and education. And this, I like to talk about this. I got this whole idea from a youth that I was working with. And I've really taken it to heart. And so like when we slip up, because we're human and it's gonna happen, recognize that someone's telling you that what you did caused them harm, whether you meant to or not. That taking a breath, an apology, and apologizing. And then to actively do better. That accountability is on you to do better and is not on the other person to help educate you on how to be better, right? Like they can offer different suggestions, but really that onus is on us all. And then I wanted to put this information out there. Again, the Dare to Know statewide prevention initiative. I will say the website is a little wonky right now. We're working on fixing that. Just more formatting. It's looking pretty gross, but we continue to push out our Facebook, social media information through there as well. So please feel free to like and follow us. If you want to check out the website, you can. The next Teen Summit will be at the end of April. I can't remember if we've released the dates yet or that final dates yet or not. But we do have our event page. If you want to get action alerts sent to your email, again, we're on Facebook. If you have any questions, and then when scholarships do come, that's the email. And then I also wanted to offer a recap video that I'll show my supervisor as well as youth at the Teen Summit talking about their experience and the importance of it. And I think it's about like 4 minutes long. And then the last, so this is the final resources page. And then I also wanted to offer, Linda brought my attention that there are some Dane County federally funded anti-violence efforts happening. So I just wanted to also bring that to your awareness. These are the ones listed. I also provided a link to an article that'll talk a little bit more about what each of those programs are going to be doing with their funding. And so really excited to see that there are federal funds coming out that are focusing on anti-violence, and specifically in Wisconsin. So that is all the information I have for you. Other questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to comment that I found this really helpful. Some of the things that you're struggling with, we've been thinking about in terms of our work with our folks with youth with lived experience, and the work that we're doing in terms of increasing youth voice around wellness and mental health. So I think there are some opportunities for us to collaborate with you in the upcoming year. So it's
Yeah.
really exciting that we're doing some similar work.
Yeah. Oh, and one of the other things that I forgot to mention is that End Abuse has set up a youth fellowship program that will be starting in August. And so we're really excited. The whole goal is, again, to go through those 3 steps of valuing your voice, persuading your peers, and connecting with community. And then the NCAP kind of project for them is that it's an expectation that they will facilitate something at the Teen Summit, and then we provide them with lodging, meals, and even transportation if it's needed.
Hi, this is Evelyn. Can I speak? I'm not sure if people can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, hi. I appreciate your talk. And it's wonderful that Wisconsin is beginning to talk the talk, especially with youth. So this was a wonderful presentation that you had, particularly focused on what you also said about decriminalizing with regards to trauma and violence. And I think that's really, really important. The point I'd like to make is really what you did point out with regards to how this affects youth and how they relate to other people from the time that they are traumatized all the way into adulthood. I know you talked about domestic violence and the recurrence of that, but I think maybe during the youth summit, or perhaps part of the focus on policy, is really addressing with youth and advocates or providers the effect on attachment from both abuse, violence, and trauma. And that, in one way, I would say would be, if you agree, the part of decriminalizing is really understanding the context by which behaviors come out in children and in young adults and adults. So people who address these issues, and plus people who have been traumatized, will also destigmatize and depathologize behaviors that come out because of trauma and violence. So I appreciate, and I don't know if you'd like to comment on that, but I appreciate your presentation. It is wonderful that you have begun talking the talk with youth.
Yeah, thank you so much. No, I appreciate everything that you have brought up, and I think that one of the other main stats, just in general, is that a victim of abuse will often go back to their abusive abusive partner at least 7 times. And so, it's because of the power and control that has been ingrained into them within this relationship, that they, build these attachments, right? That they, start equating that abuse with love, and that hope for, you know, that quote unquote honeymoon period in the cycle of violence, right? Of like a big event happen, violent event happen, and now it's that like, oh, I'm so sorry. Here's all the wonderful gifts. Here's all the ways that I love you, right? And that kind of like a love bombing type of situation where it's like, oh, well, they actually do care about me. They just have, you know, and then, you know, start to spin it and whatnot. So I do think it's really important that we are understanding the, you know, that really the lived experience part of it, right? Like we're wanting to make sure that we understand where these folks are coming from, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in helping in any type of way. Is by making sure that we understand where they're coming from. Anything else?
Well, I will chime in. There are comments in the chat. Fabulous presentation, kind of pulling together things, but also giving hope that there are things to be done. So it's not just listing the stats and wringing our hands. It's education of people that may currently be involved in this kind of cycle, the cycle of violence, and just exploring this is just reminding me of times, you know, in my office, many times of talking with a family that's caught in the cycle, and the parent partners are you know, struggling with this, and the part of the cycle where they say, I love you, I don't want to lose you. It can be absolutely true, but without education about the cycle and how do we break it, then it's just together and apart and together and apart. And one of the things I've noticed that especially the female victim, which is the more stereotyped, it's not always females victimized, but that the mother of the kids that I'm working with, when they hear that it's exposing kids to domestic violence, is essentially programming them, and that this cute little 6-year-old boy, you know, the chances that he may grow up and continue this behavior in an intimate relationship, and the cute little blinking 4-year-old girl might accept that this is part and parcel of what relationships are. Sometimes the moms will start to cry and just say, you know, that obviously I don't want that, but they need help and support, psychological support, often financial support, to safely try to heal the relationship and break the cycle. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Just really quickly before I officially end, I did want to mention one of the resources, the Children and Youth Advocate Manual, is a resource that I adapted and continually update for youth advocates, but specifically section 1 on child and youth development. I've gone through and created some youth development charts. And so we have them from conception to 18 years old, and then typical development, and then possible impacts from abuse, right? So in the second, let me pull up one. So yeah, we focus on cognitive, social, emotional, and physical for almost all of them. And then we also had a UW intern help us create one specifically for conception to birth. So those are free and available to use on our website, and definitely feel free to share those. They're not meant to be used as any type of diagnostic tool, but more as like, here's information as to like possible things that you may be seeing, but also remember that like these signs don't always have to be signs of abuse, right? Like there could be other factors going on, but you know, at least to start to kind of build that foundational information between the families you're working with.
So I think Gabby's going to lead us through some discussion, and Cody, we hope you will stay with us to be a expert advisor. But Gabby, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so when we were looking at the list of ways kids can be exposed to violence from our last meeting, and then looking at more at domestic violence, we had a number of questions that popped up as far as, you know, we know this, some statistics, but how does exposure to domestic violence affect a child's mental health, their brain development? I've read statistics that like functional MRIs of the brains of kids exposed to domestic violence can't be distinguished from combat veterans, for example. Now that was not a full study, but a huge concern. And so with this look at this particular exposure to violence, we identified questions about what is being done to address these concerns. And thank you, Cody, you've really helped flesh that out for me, at least. And then what more could be done about domestic violence. But at this point, I wanted to know what you think. We want to know if the council wants to continue with a focus on domestic violence, or if there are other aspects of violence discussed at our last meeting that we would prefer to focus in on. So I think we have some poll questions. And I am not tech savvy, so I did sign into